We're working. Okay, sorry for the delay. Technology just, I give it a week off and it forgets how to work. Good to see everyone. Hope you all had a very nice Thanksgiving. Because we are coming back after the Thanksgiving holiday, and we didn't have class last week, I'm going to exercise rabbinic prerogative, which means we're going to be doing a makeup lesson this week for last week's Torah portion, because there was a particular connection that I wanted to bring, and if we miss it, then we wouldn't be able to do it until next year. So 1 week off, I think we can be forgiven. Please remember to read not only last week's Torah portion, if you haven't, but also this week's Torah portion, even though that's not the one we're focusing on. Everyone okay with that?
Yep. So what are we doing?
We're doing Vayishlach, and we are on chapter 34. And we're going to just skip the intro because we're running out of time thanks to the technical issues. Dinah, indeed. It's not exactly the happy story that everybody loves to read or look forward to. This is not pleasant. I should say to the YouTube world, if you're watching with small children, you may want to watch this first to ensure that it is exactly what you want to share with your younger children. Some of the material, not just in this particular section, but also that will be discussed, may not be suitable for younger audiences.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be one of those television announcers. All right, so chapter 34, verse 1, if you wouldn't mind.
Let's start. Now Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land.
Right, so remember, we are back in the land of Canaan. We have just taken care of the reunification and separation with Esau, and Jacob is settling. And now that he's settled, his family is getting used to the people that they live with. They're not in Haran anymore.
Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, chief of the country, saw her and took her and lay with her by force.
Right, so, or as we would call this in modern English, he raped her. Right, he saw her, apparently he liked her, and that was what he did.
Being strongly drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and in love with the maiden, he spoke to the maiden tenderly. So Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Give me this girl as a wife." Jacob heard.
Okay, well, let's make sure we got what's going on here. So he has laid eyes on her, and being the prince of the city, he can do whatever he wants because that was the Canaanite way. And he goes and rapes her, and having raped her, he says, yeah, she'd make a good wife, not only somebody to abuse on the side of the road, which I suppose is a promotion. And although it's unclear, it does seem to be that he has actually taken her back to the home, to Shechem, to the city. So he has raped her and kidnapped her at this point, but being the gentleman that he is proposing marriage. But of course, proposing marriage means you have to get consent from the woman's father. And that's where we now move in the story.
And would she be one of many wives that he might have?
Quite likely. Canaanites did allow for polygamy as well. And usually the higher up the social ladder you were, the more wives you had. I mean, after all, Leah's father had 4. So it wouldn't be unusual for her to expect that either.
But I always had problems with after he rapes her, then the next sentence he loves her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
he lusted after her. I don't see where he loved her.
He liked what he got.
Right.
So that's where
I
He
guess.
had a small measure of human in him.
right. So well that's where the Hebrew is so there's a problem with translations where the Hebrew word for love, ahav, is the root that's being used here, but that word does not only mean love. I mean, the same way that in English the word love doesn't only mean love. Right? I could love my dog when I was growing up. Right? That doesn't mean I want to marry my dog. I can love ice cream. Again, doesn't mean I'm proposing. And I can even love, I'm sure people probably loved some of their servants or slaves, but that doesn't mean that they thought of them as being equals or should be treated as equals.
Yes.
So love in the concept of romantic love that we have in the modern world is one meaning to the Hebrew word love, but it's one of the rarer meanings of the Hebrew word love. So we shouldn't immediately assume that love here means Romeo and Juliet, passionate and pure and unsullied romantic love. It was probably a mix of like and lust, and she did something for him that he wanted more of, and that was what he felt at the time. And we can see that it says, I think the English, they say strongly drawn.
Yeah, he was
His
strongly
soul clung to her is the more literal translation, right? He cleaved to her, is more to the point. So he is infatuated, right? He is besotted. Infatuated, besotted doesn't necessarily imply the purest of romantic intentions, any more than the word ahav should make us think these were pure romantic intentions.
But he could have also raped some girl and not liked her at all and pushed her away.
And
This
we have
shows-
examples of that
Yeah, we should. That was not
with
this.
one of David's sons, who did exactly that.
Oh, that was-
So
Right.
yes,
So he didn't dislike her. He liked her.
yeah. So it's better than it could have been.
Yes, that's true.
But this is still not what you want to have happen.
But there's an order. He seizes her, he lays with her,
Mhm.
then he's drawn to her, and then he loves her.
Actually,
your point that
Yeah.
he sampled the
He
where.
said, "Well, video."
although you left off one important point, he saw her.
Right, he saw her first.
Very important point in Jewish thinking about how lust begins. They say that the way to a man's heart is not through his stomach, but through his eyes. And actually, they don't usually talk about the heart. They talk much lower. That what the eyes don't see, the body doesn't lust for. And so there's a notion here that him looking was what sparked the passion. Right? He saw first, then he took.
And there's always the warning about be careful of what you see, because what you see, with Lot, for example, he sees it, it looks good, but
And ends up in the bad position. All right,
Okay.
so onward.
So Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home.
Right. He is vulnerable. I mean, yes, he is wealthy, and yes, he has a nice, household that provides him some measure of protection from random brigands. But this is the leader of the local city. This is not, the mayor, but the mayor who owns the police and can order you to be killed, and no one's going to say no. How does he object? How does he work this? Okay, so
Jacob kept silent until his sons came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor came out to Jacob to speak to him. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done. And Hamor spoke with them, saying, "My son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You will dwell among us, and the land will be open before you. Settle, move about, and acquire holdings in it."
all right, so notice what the deal here is. The father, the prince, the king of Shechem, is not saying, "My son, your daughter, they like each other, let them get married," right? He's saying, "My son, your daughter, this can be the beginning of a beautiful national relationship. Your people, my people, not just your
Our
son, my,
land.
right? We will be blended together." And, this is more than just making the match for one person. Now, this is probably an important point because they are clearly different than the people of Shechem. And they don't, in the eyes of Shechem, have the rights to certain types of land holdings and certain types of property. And therefore, this is being offered quite generously that, hey, you semi-nomadic sheep guys, we'll let you actually settle down rather than continuing to tell you, move along, like we do to most foreigners. All right, so this is a very generous and possibly tempting offer to many other people, despite the horrific way that the relationship, if you can call it that, began. Good? Questions, comments? Onward.
Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Do me this favor, and I will pay whatever you tell me. Ask of me a bride price ever so high, as well as gifts, and I will pay what you tell me. Only give me the maiden for a wife."
All right, so this is the plan.
Yeah.
Just, I'll go through the normal marriage process, even though it began wrong. And we'll sort of forget how this all started, but I'm going to act like this is just a normal proposal from this point forward. And I'm really willing to pay anything, even though she's damaged goods. Because I damaged her. Well, I mean, that usually would reduce
Yes.
the bride
Yes.
price,
Yeah.
right?
She's
So,
only damaged goods because he damaged
Yeah.
her.
yeah,
But it
and
doesn't
he's
matter.
making good on that, right? He's willing to pay for the damage he caused. Doesn't that make him a noble person?
It doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't. Exactly right.
Not in our book.
But if you're from the culture of Canaan, this is like above and beyond the call of duty, right? I mean, he doesn't actually have an obligation to do anything.
Mhm.
He can simply take her if he wants and keep her as a slave. And there would be nothing that Jacob and his family could do about that. So he thinks he is being very, very generous and magnanimous in what he's doing.
Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor, speaking with guile because he had defiled their sister Dinah, and said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, but that is a disgrace among us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become like us in that every male among you is circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you and take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell among you and become as one kindred. But if you will not listen to us and become circumcised, we will take our daughter and go."
All right. So there's a couple interesting things that are happening here. I mean, one, obviously, it's a trick. We know that as the reader because the narrator told us. Obviously, the people of Shem didn't know this was a trick. They have no intention of letting Dinah stay with them. They have no intention of ratifying or somehow papering over the crime that he committed by raping her. But they are still trying to find a way that they can get her away from them, as well as not be massacred in the process of defying the local dictator. So they are working this. But notice the they that's involved, right? This is her brothers that are speaking, not their father.
And I know in two parashas, when they meet Joseph, the first thing they say is, "We're honest men."
Yeah.
And I have that note. It always strikes me.
Well, generally speaking, they are. And then, the question of,
But
is
there's something
this,
but there's something that's going to happen in the text that I can answer.
is this deception worthwhile?
Yeah.
And also, of course,
Because
they are kind of telling the truth, which is they wouldn't let her marry someone who wasn't circumcised.
But she is defiled permanently, so how would that help in her future?
It's not a question of,
I mean, I know they're angry.
right, but in terms of like defilement, that's not a permanent status. Here, when they're talking about defilement, they're using it as a euphemism for being raped. They're not saying that she is.
No, she's no longer a virgin.
But
So
she's
they
no
marry
longer.
her.
Oh, she can marry someone else.
She can.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Just
She.
as long as they're circumcised.
But the question is,
Yes.
so they were answering the guile, but the question I had, well, maybe the sons of Shechem are also speaking with guile.
Well, actually, let's get to their
With that
response.
guile.
So, verse 15.
So they're
Right.
Their words,
18.
please.
Yes, 18. Their words.
Oh, yeah, glasses.
Their words, "Please Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem." And the youth lost no time in doing the thing, for he wanted Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most respected in his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the public place of their town and spoke to their fellow townsmen, saying,
Now, notice the deal as they present it to the townsfolk.
Right.
"These people are our friends. Let them settle in the land and move about in it, for the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters to ourselves as wives and give our daughters to them. But only on this condition will the men agree with us to dwell among us and be as one kindred, that all our males become circumcised as they are circumcised. Their cattle and substance and all their beasts will be ours if we only agree to their terms, so that they will settle among us."
And that's what struck me.
All who went out of the gate of his town heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and all males, all those who went out of the gate to his town, were circumcised.
All right. So, what was the spin on the
Yeah.
circumcision deal?
We're going to get rich.
Yep.
Yes, we get all that stuff. Yep.
Back now, doctors are standing by. One quick circumcision, and you too can be loaded by getting the money from Jacob's wonderful wealth train. All right, all you got to do is circumcise yourself, and bam,
This is ours.
yeah, and we get their stuff.
And their cattle.
Right, I mean, which does actually make sense by the numbers of people, right? They're going to be more coming from Jacob proportionally into the city than vice versa. And therefore, as they intermingle, Jacob will be absorbed into the townsfolk, not the other way around, at least just by raw numbers. So it does make sense that over time, the inheritance, the wealth will eventually accrue to the townsfolk rather than to Jacob and his family. So, you know, if you're going to have people come and you're going to give them possession, you're going to let them intermarry, you're going to let them migrate into your land, you want the rich ones, right? That we'll let the rich ones in because we'll get their stuff. I mean, they will help the local economy.
They'll help the economy.
But that's basically what he's saying. Okay.
On the third day, when the men were in pain,
Apparently that is when the pain really catches up to you.
Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, took each his sword and came upon the city unmolested and killed all the males. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. The other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town because their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses, all that was inside the town and outside, all their wealth, all their children and their wives, all that was in the houses, they took as captives and booty.
Go ahead and finish off the story.
Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me. I am odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My men are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." But they answered, "Should our sister be treated like a whore?"
And on that
Wow.
stinging rejoinder,
Wow.
who was right?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, who was right?
Who was right?
No answer here.
Who was in the right? So we have a number of different parties acting here. I mean, obviously, we're going to all agree that Shem was in the wrong for what he did,
Yeah.
right? And Hamor, his father, was also in the wrong. And
Jacob?
Jacob's in the right.
But the punishment did not fit the crime.
well,
I mean,
Maybe.
every man being killed and every
or did
woman
it fit?
sold.
Did it fit the perceived threat if they weren't willing to go along with it?
Mm.
Right. So
Mhm.
the crime may have been the rape and the abduction of Dinah, but the perceived threat was if we don't agree to their terms, they'll just kill us and take her and take our stuff anyway. So
But it
we
doesn't-
are
Where is that? Where's the hint
of violence.
of violence coming from the Canaanites?
Well, you have to sort of try and anticipate what the society that believes that it's okay for the local leader's son to go around raping random women and to agree that that's what good enough that he doesn't need to be punished or in any way reprimanded or force the local people. The local people didn't force him to return her. That these were not people who had a sense of
So
morality
all the
that we
time
might
this
agree.
is going on, she's in the castle.
yes, she's in the town.
She's in
She's
hostage.
captive or a honored guest being wooed.
But she's not just a guest because right before this, Jacob buys property.
Right.
And so there's this a formal relationship, and this is
Mhm.
this is the other thing that strikes me. He's just bought property.
Yep, he thought he was settling down.
He thought he was settling down, so that's a different level. He should not be treated.
Absolutely,
Yes,
but he is
because-
still a foreigner, right? And foreigners are fair game, right? There's a reason why the Torah says over and over and over again to treat the stranger with love, to treat the stranger with respect, to not subvert the rights of the stranger. It's because Canaanites did it all the time, right? Strangers were fair game. They were easy pickings. And yeah, you could tolerate them if there was some benefit to you. But if you wanted to abuse, harass, or otherwise, harm them, that generally wasn't illegal or even necessarily frowned on. And this is a good example of where they feel they're being generous
Yes.
by making their proposal because they could just do whatever they felt like. But, why do it that way? Because, she's probably not going to be terribly happy being married to the guy if she just saw the town massacre the rest of the family. So there is definitely a perception of threat. It's the perception of threat that Jews have always felt whenever we have been in a vulnerable minority position where we didn't have a rule of law that we could rely on, where we didn't believe that there was any way for us to appeal to a higher authority because it was the higher authority that was abusing us.
Yes.
And that seems to be the situation they're in. But does that mean that Jacob was right in not doing much? Does that mean that the brothers were right in finding a way through guile to be able to not only get her back, but to punish them and prevent any further reprisals, right? In case you were wondering why they actually took care of everyone else rather than just the guy who had raped their sister, if they only killed him, then the next scene would have been the city fighting back. And that would not have gone well for Jacob and the family. So it's messy.
But the brothers don't seem to think, they're standing there listening to their father, kind of saying yes to all of this stuff, while they're in their minds going, no way, no
We're not.
way. I mean, they don't consult him with what they're going to do.
Right.
They just do it.
Right, because in their minds, for her to be treated as a zonah, right, which is a whore, right, that they have, there's nothing left, right? There's no compromise once that has happened. Because what they're looking at here is not just a question of zonah, which sometimes can be translated as promiscuity, but they're really talking about zonah whoring her to the local people.
Right.
Because they're saying, if you accept this bargain, you're basically saying you're selling your daughter for sex for the benefits that will bring to you and us. And that, when he talks about treating her like a whore, they're not only talking about Shem treating her like a whore, they're talking about the potential for Jacob to be treating her like that.
Their own fathers.
Well, I agree with the brothers, really. I have 5 brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see if that happened to, and I have 3 sisters, so there are 9 of us.
Right.
So I can see if that happened to one of us. My brothers would not have taken that crap, and they wouldn't have asked my father nothing. They would have reacted immediately.
And you couldn't buy them off with a check.
No way.
Exactly right.
No
right.
way.
I don't care how rich you are.
So,
It's not going to be.
is this still, however, the right response? To try and compare that a little bit, we're going to look at another horrible story, this time taken from the book of Judges, chapter 19.
No.
Yes, we're going to Gibeah.
Oh,
Before we go, just
Yes.
I have one thought, and that is, look at the repercussions today when Christians say, look what you guys did in your Bible.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And they hold this story up as an example of what Jews do.
Oh.
Well, one of the beautiful things about this
When
story
does that matter?
is that there is an ambiguity to whether or not the biblical narrator agrees with the actions of the sons, right? There is no statement of, yay, they were right. However, what we do know is that these guys are not blessed for their actions when Jacob is giving them their blessings later on. And we also know that all 3 of them, both Reuben for the couch reasons that we read about before, that means his father's concubine, the euphemism, and as well as Shimon and Levi for here, are skipped over as being the true leaders of the tribes of Israel, of the true firstborn, right? All 3 of these guys, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, they were in line ahead of Judah. And it's only Judah in his process of dealing with the Joseph situation that rises to the top and becomes the leader. So there's definitely something about what Shimon and Levi are doing here that the narrator is not approving of. But you're right, it's subtle because it's not written like a modern novel where it says, and that was a bad thing. You have to wait for the consequences, sometimes 10, 30, 40 years down the line before you can begin to say whether the narrator approved or disapproved of their behavior. And then it's a question of, well, was the narrator disapproving of their motivation or disapproving of their tactic? And that then creates much more commentary. But we have a comparison story, which we're going to try and use to see what the effect is of living in lands and among people where this behavior is rubbing off. Because we can all agree from the Torah onward, and really even before that, you can see embedded in this narrative, the people of Israel, the tribes, the people of Abraham, this was not the way you behaved, right? Hagar was, really treated better than Dinah is being treated here. There was a different standard, and if it weren't for later interactions, which we've talked about before, she would have remained a wife of Abraham, right? The idea of taking a woman captive off the side of the road and just using her this way was an anathema to the Jewish people and to the children of Abraham, and especially the Torah itself actively says, do not do this. But does that mean that we actually refrain from doing it? Or have we not always lived up to that ideal?
And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel.
Which is basically saying the common frame that's used throughout the book of Judges to say people did whatever they felt like. And when they did whatever they felt like, they usually got it wrong.
Yeah. There was a certain Levite living on the far side of Mount Ephraim who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Yehudah. And his concubine was faithless to him.
Right. Literally, the word that's used there is the word zonah. Right. The same word that was being used here at the end by the brothers rhetorically about their sister. She was faithless.
And went away from him to her father's house, to Bethlehem, Yehudah, and was there 4 whole months.
All right. So she is faithless and she runs away. Right. And she goes back to her dad's house and she's there for 4 months.
And her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back, having his servant with him and a couple of asses.
Right. So he decides after 4 months, I got to go bring her home. Right. So he loads up, goes down to try and talk to her.
And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the girl saw him, he rejoiced to meet him.
Right. He was probably happy that there was the potential for reconciliation.
And his father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him. And he lived with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodge there.
Right. So this is an example, as we're going to see this in the next few verses, of what Hachnasat Orchim is meant to be, of hospitality. Right. This guy is being exceedingly gracious as a host to his son-in-law, who might have more reason to be upset, and trying to help mitigate everything that's happened by showing this kindness and this support.
And it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning, and he rose up to depart. And the girl's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterwards go on your way. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the girl's father had said to the man, be content, I pray you, and tarry all night, and let your heart be merry.
All right, so they end up staying the rest of the day.
And when the man rose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him. Therefore, he lodged there again. And he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the girl's father said, refresh your heart, I pray you, and delay until the afternoon. And they did, both of them, eat. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, behold, now the day draws toward evening.
It's afternoon.
Stay the night. Behold, the day comes to an end. Stay here the night, and your heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that you may go home. But the man would not tarry that night, and he rose up and departed, and came over against Yebus, which is Yerushalayim, and there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine was also with him.
All right, so late on the 5th day, they finally get out of Bethlehem, of Bethlehem.
Yeah, they're escaping.
They're escaping the hospitality.
Yeah.
Right? And that escape of hospitality is going to become a very important contrast to what they're going to meet.
And when they were by Yebus, the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, come, I pray you, and let us turn into this city of Yebusi, and we will spend the night here.
All right, so Yebusi at this time was still a Canaanite city. Right, the Jerusalem had not yet been taken. The outer environs, as we had talked about prior, were seized during the time of Joshua, but the city itself had remained an independent Canaanite city. It would be only until it would take until King David before that would finally become a permanent Jewish city. So when the servant, who may or may not have been a Hebrew servant, says, "Let's go into Jerusalem," the Levite says, "No."
But his master said to him, we will not turn aside here into the city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said to his servant, come, and let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night, in Gibeah or Ramah.
Right, so the idea is, we don't want to go there. They're strangers, right? That's like the city of Shechem, right? From our story with Dinah. And we all know what happens if you go there. Strangers are fair game. They can mistreat us. So we don't have any expectation of hospitality or care or protection. So yeah, I don't want to go there. That's a bad idea. We'll go to one of these other nice Jewish towns.
And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin.
Right, so Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, which is one of the smallest tribe, that was where they got by the time that it was just way too dark to keep going.
And they turned aside there to go in and lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open place of the city, for there was no man that took him into his house to lodge that night.
All right, so they get to the city and no hospitality, right? No one notices or no one cares about this stranger they see coming in. And so he just sits down in the town square. Does it sound familiar?
Yeah.
Another story that's similar to this?
Yeah.
What story is that?
Saddam.
Right, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the angels come down to visit Lot, they also end up in the town square, and they also, as we're going to see, have someone, in that case Lot, come and say, oh no, you don't want to stay here. And what happens next will also, I hope, remind you of that story.
And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field that evening, who was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamin.
All right, so let's make sure we understand why the narrator is telling this. Who is the one person that is showing him hospitality? The non-local.
The Ephraim.
Right, the Ephraimite.
Yeah.
Right, the Ephraimite, who is sojourning there, that means temporarily living in the area, he is taking care of the stranger, not the Benjamites that are actually the natives of that town, which means the Benjamites are treating an Ephraimite, got to keep those words straight, almost as though they are strangers, right? They are treating this guy in the town square the same way that he was fearful the Jerusalemites might treat him, because the Jerusalemites at that time weren't Jewish. So he's only getting help because he's got someone else who's a fellow Ephraimite showing up. And that cliquishness among the different tribes is also one of the underlying themes of the book of Judges, that the tribes of Israel often didn't behave to each other like brothers, but instead behaved towards each other as though the other tribes were strangers that they owed nothing to and would expect nothing from. Here the Levite seems to be expecting hospitality. He's getting nothing. And the one guy who shows up that gives him hospitality isn't the guy who should be. It's the other stranger in town that's giving him help.
I didn't realize they had sibling rivalry.
Oh, you don't remember the story of Joseph?
That's true, yes.
Everything that happened in that story is foreshadowing what happens to the tribes.
And the old man lifted up his eyes and saw a traveler in the open place of the city. And the old man said, where do you go? And where have you come from? And he said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem, Yehuda, and onto the far side of Mount Ephraim. I am from there. And I went to Bethlehem, Yehuda, but I am now going to the house of the Lord, for there is no man that receives me in his house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses. There is bread and wine also for me and for your handmaid and for the young man who is with your servants. There is no want of anything.
Basically saying, we're just looking for a roof. We've got food for our animals. We've got food for ourselves. All we want is a place to stay. So we're not beggars, right? And that's also why it's had the repetition of saying it's the guy with his donkeys and this guy with his donkeys. And why do we keep being here about these donkeys? It's to remind us that he's not showing up as some poor schlep. He is showing up as somebody who looks like a well-to-do traveler. He's got a little entourage. He's got all of his supplies. This is the kind of person that should be easy to be hospitable to. He's not in rags and showing up without a penny to his name or a shekel to his name. He's the kind of guy that should be easy to be hospitable to. And they're not.
But the old man said, peace be with you. Only let all your wants lie upon me, but don't lodge in the street. So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and did eat and drink.
All right, so he does what hospitality is meant to be, right? He is welcoming to these guys.
Now, as they were gladdening their hearts, behold, the men of the city, worthless men, beset the house around about and beat at the door and spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man that came into your house, that we may have our desire of him. And the man, master of the house.
We all understand what is meant by our desire of him, right? They're looking to rape. And that form of male-on-male rape was not uncommon in the ancient world, not as a romantic act, but as a form of dominance, as a form of showing who the alpha males were. And so it wasn't necessarily that they had any inclination towards men as a sexual object. They weren't made that way, if you will, but they were willing to do that because that way they got to be the alpha males. So it doesn't necessarily mean they were homosexual. It means almost certainly that they were heterosexual, but looking to dominate this stranger because, you know, hey, it's a stranger. We can do it.
It's like bad frat hazing.
Yeah.
Bad frat hazing in the worst possible sense. Yes.
Yeah, dominated and inflict pain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the master of the house, the master of the house went out to them and said, "No, my brethren, no, I pray you, do not so wickedly. Don't do that. Seeing that this man has come into my house, do not carry out this vileness."
All right. So the vileness is not just the specific carnal act, but it is the breach of hospitality. Right. That is also the ugliness that's being described here. And it's, again, hearkening back to what happened with Shem, was the way it was gone about. The lack of civility to strangers is partly also why the Torah condemns what he did. The rape in and of itself, yes, is terrible. But the fact that they did that to another group that was living nearby, that was also an additional crime that was committed in the act. And that's what the old man is trying to say. No, 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 you can't breach hospitality by doing this. Instead,
behold, here is my daughter, a virgin, and his concubine.
Sound familiar from the Lot story?
Yes, like Lot.
Yeah.
I will bring them out now, ravish them, and do with them what seems good to you. But to this man, do not do so vile a thing.
Okay, so again, not necessarily the right response,
No.
but he also sees himself in a impossible position of violence that's around about the house.
But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and brought her out to them. And they had their desire of her and abused her all night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go.
All right, so we'll look at some of the commentary, but I just want to make sure we got the picture, at least up to this point, is basically the Levite, right? Not the Ephraimite, but the Levite. He says, oh, and throws the concubine out and slams the door. So she is now trapped outside the house. And even though the men had not agreed to it, they do decide that that's good enough for them. And so they abuse her throughout the entire night. And then in the morning, they let her go. Not exactly what we would call exemplary behavior. I hope we all understand and appreciate that there's a reason why this whole chapter began with the phrase, there is no king. Again, hearkening back to this idea of all of the book of Judges, that because there was no king, people just made up what they thought was good. And at the moment, this seemed like a good idea. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't have a king. By the way, I should point out that the term "there was no king in Israel" doesn't necessarily mean that they were that the narrator is only advocating for a flesh and blood king. It also means that the people weren't even recognizing God as their king.
Moral behavior.
Exactly. Because if they have no sense of a higher power, whether it be a flesh and blood person that can punish them, or whether it be, hopefully, ideally, God who has given them a moral code, if people don't have either of those, then, well, then this. Then this is what happens.
Then came the woman in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold.
Right. So she crawls her way back, collapses at the door. He gets up to continue his journey.
Right. He wasn't looking for
Doesn't
her.
exactly sound like he was looking for her. And oh, look, there she is.
Right at the threshold of the
Right.
door, holding on to it.
And he said to her, "Up and let us be going."
Come on, time to go.
Come on.
She's been out being raped by
Yes.
But there was
down.
no answer. Then the man took her up on a donkey, and the man rose up and went to his place.
So he goes home. Now, apparently at this point, she is already dead.
Oh,
Right? Apparently at this point, she is already dead. She died from the abuse that she suffered during the night. And she only just made it back to the house.
and
When he
that's
says,
the
get
last.
up, and she gets no response, he's like, oh, I guess she's dead. Throws her on the donkey and sets off.
And when he was come to his house,
heartless is a good word, yes.
when he came to his house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces and sent her into the whole territory of Israel. And it was so that all that saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came out of the land of Mitzrayim to this day. Consider of it, take counsel, and speak your mind.
All right, so everyone got rather riled up about what had happened.
Wow.
Now, what are they riled up about?
That's a good question.
That she had been raped.
Exactly. It was the attack and the abuse and the lack of hospitality.
But it's also, lust has become their dominating force. It's like Sodom also then with the rape of Dinah.
Right.
When lust is all you're thinking about, this is a
Well,
blind.
when you're letting yourself be led in one particular emotion, yes,
Yes.
it's never a good thing. But the idea here is that he cut it into 12 pieces to try and
Each part of the country.
right and sent it to each of the tribes
Each of the tribal
so that they would
leaders.
all get a piece of what had happened, and to basically lay at their doorstep what he felt was the crime of the Benjamites, and saying, this is wrong, this is terrible, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
All right, so what do they do about it? Does anybody read the next? Because we're going to skip to chapter 21 to see the repercussions of what they chose to do.
Well, they nearly wipe out the Benjamites.
Exactly. They basically decide to do to the Benjamites what Levi and Shimon had tried to do to the people of Shechem, which is they launch a war against the Benjamites. Well, first they go to the Benjamites and they say, give us the people of Gibeah, and we're going to punish them because they were terrible and horrible and all of that. And the Benjamites go, no, you can't do that. They're our folk. And they say, no, they're terrible. And the Benjamites say, no, they're our folk. And they say, they're going to go to war. And in fact, not only are we going to go to war, we are going to vow against you that our people will be cut off from you. No one will be allowed to give their daughters to you in marriage. Right? Our daughters will never be allowed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin ever again. So help me God. They swore an oath that they were going to separate completely from the people of Benjamin because of this. And then they go to a war. There's massive death tolls on both sides, because the Benjamites were considered to be among the best fighters. And then the war stops. And now people start thinking about the repercussions. Right? Now that the heat of the battle and the heat of the offense and everything else has begun to fade. And they're not sure what to do. So that's what we're going to pick up in chapter 21.
Now the men of Israel had sworn in Mitzpeh, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin to wife. And the people came to the house of God and lived there until evening before God, and lifted up their voices and wept very bitterly and said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel?
So here's the regret. They're like, oh no, what have we done? Now Benjamin is going to get wiped out, right? Because we murdered a lot of their women and a lot of their men. So there's like hardly any of them left. And we can't replenish them because we've sworn this oath. Oh dear, woe is us. One of the tribes is going to get wiped out. You didn't think about that before?
Right.
Onward.
And the children of Israel relented on account of Benjamin, their brother, and said, there is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. How shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give any of them our daughters to wife?
Right. So what are we going to do? Right. We made this vow and now we're stuck. So first solution.
And they said, which one is there of the tribes of Israel that didn't come up to Mitzpeh to the Lord?
Right. When we had the big summoning to get the war council together to fight against the Benjamites, was there anybody who didn't come? Because if they didn't come, they weren't there to take the oath. And so they're still available. They're eligible. Exactly.
And behold, none had come to the camp from Yavesh Gilad to the assembly. And they found among the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilad 400 young virgins that had known no man carnally. And they brought them to the camp to Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. And the whole congregation sent some to speak to the children of Benjamin that were in the rock Rimmon, and to call peaceably to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the wives whom they had saved alive of the women of Yabesh Gilad, and yet they suffice them not.
Yeah, 400 women is not really enough, right?
There were 600 who turned in flood.
Right. So this is inadequate. So
The people felt regret for Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel.
right, who made the breach?
Yeah, the Lord.
The Lord, and now
Yeah.
they're blaming it on God.
Of course.
Of course. Then the
Yeah.
elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing that the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for them that are escaped of Benjamin, that a tribe not be destroyed out of Israel."
Right. So in case you're wondering, this is very similar to the underlying logic that God does give us for the Levirate marriage, for Yibum, where if a man dies and he has no children, then his wife can marry his brother, and that way any children born will be considered to be from the first man. We do worry about our brothers disappearing from us, right? We don't say, "Woo, one brother dead, more inheritance for me." We say, "One brother dead, that's bad for all of us." So they have the right underlying desire, which is to fix this problem and save and help their brothers. That does not justify the solution they're about to come up with.
Yet we may not give them wives of our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn, saying, "Cursed be he that gives a wife to Benjamin." Then they said, "Behold, there is a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south of Livona." Therefore they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, "Go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and see and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards, and catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And it shall be, if their fathers or their brethren come to us to complain, then we will say to them, Be favorable to them for our sakes, because we took not a wife to every man in the war, nor did you give them willingly at this time, that you should be guilty."
All right, so what's the solution?
Set it up so that they can.
Right. We're not going to break our vow.
How,
We're just going to let them steal women and not complain.
And not complain.
Right? Now, the women don't get any say in this because they're
Yeah,
being
they're
set
not
up
around.
because they
They're not
can't
there.
be given a say, because if they're given a say, then the fathers also have to consent, and if the fathers also have to consent, they would be breaking their vows.
Right.
So basically, this is like the rape of the Sabines, right? Or 7 brides for 7 brothers, right? They're gonna break in and they're gonna steal the women and they're gonna run back. And for the sake of peace, we won't argue about it. Sound like a very similar story to we had with Shechem, only on large scale, right? The great solution to how are we going to get women to them is, well, just let them steal some.
what is the law in Deuteronomy about seizing a woman to be your wife?
Yeah, it's kind of
30 days
it's kind of prohibited, and she also still gets to say no.
You say no, and there's the whole process.
But not in this case.
Exactly right.
Not in this case at all.
Exactly right. Which is, again, not to say that what is happening here is approved of by the biblical narrator. This is being shown as an example of what was wrong in Israel during the days of the judges.
But it also, like the last line, they could do this and not even feel guilty.
Well, yeah, because they're fixing the problem,
Rationalized it out
right? This is
themselves.
not a crime. This is a solution,
Right.
and that insanity is exactly what the author of the book of Judges is trying to draw to our attention. You know, throughout the whole book of Judges, we hear, and the people did what was wrong in the sight of God, and then there was lift up an oppressor, and then we cry out, and then we get a redeemer, and then it's quiet for a while, and then we do what was wrong in the sight of God. This is one of those examples to tell us, what kind of things were we doing that God was so upset with? This. This is what they were doing.
Amazing is that they all seem to agree to do this wrong thing. Just no one there had any indication to say this is wrong.
Excuse me, guys?
No restraint in nobody?
Well, so-
Nobody?
You know, they had the ark was sitting in Shiloh, right? At
Yes.
this time?
Yeah.
The ark is sitting in Shiloh, and there's people coming for sacrifices, and there's,
Normal religious
Well,
life,
you know, religious seemingly life with Torah,
right?
seemingly, But it's not getting any farther than that valley.
Yeah, but they were also fighting over who gets Micah's idols in the previous chapter, and then Yiftach sacrifices his own daughter because of a stupid vow. You know, the stupidity of these generations is pretty staggering.
Again, the last verse of this chapter, we didn't put in those days there was no king in Israel, and all the people did what was right in their own eyes.
Right, which, by the way, is always a statement that what they were doing was wrong.
Right.
Because if it was only right in their own eyes and not right in the eyes of God, then you weren't right. All right,
So
so
they seem to go through an awful lot of, well, this is how we could do it. You know, there's a lot of men discussing what they could do with the women in their.
But there's no, what does the Torah say? There, not once they say, let us inquire of the Lord. Not once they say, what does the law say?
Why don't we send someone to Shiloh and?
right. So I'm just going to do a little brief bit of commentary because we are pretty much out of time. So turn the page, and we have the sages discussing what's going on here.
So the sages discussed what occurred that caused her husband to become so angry with her that she left him.
All right. So what to make you understand this, the sages had to understand that her lack of faithfulness couldn't be full-on adultery, because full-on adultery would mean he would not be allowed to be still with her, right? If a woman commits adultery, then you're not allowed to remain married to her. So there had to be some other breach that was going on in the relationship, and something that drove her apart from him and something that drove him apart from her. And so this is one explanation they come up with.
One rabbi said, he found her responsible for a fly in the food that she prepared for him. But Rabbi Yonatan said, no, he found her responsible for a hair.
Right. And that is what we're talking about as the spark for all of this. Now, what are they trying to say here? Is that like, they actually have some secret tradition that what was actually being done in the household? No. But what they're trying to say is what kind of things in a toxic relationship can set off a chain of events that can embroil an entire village, or in this case, an entire country. They're saying, yeah, if you're in the wrong relationship, then the wrong thing in your soup, and all of a sudden the fists are out and words are flying and the damage is done. And then she's running off to her father's house for protection, and then you're chasing her down, and then now look at what road you're on. All right, so they're trying to draw our attention back to the beginning of the story, that it doesn't begin in that way coincidentally, right? It begins in that way to show that he and she also had problems in their relationship. And they're trying to point out that even something as minor as this could be a problem if the relationship is already broken. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
all right, we're going to, the tipping point, as you might say. We're going to skip the middle part because it is very long, but I do highly recommend you read it because it's a very interesting thing about what vows are and whether they should or shouldn't be done. But we're going to just pick up with a quick commentary at the bottom of the page. First from Rashi.
From Rashi, she strayed away from his home to the outside. The word promiscuity, always denotes departure, one who leaves her husband and loves another.
All right, so she saw some other guy and began doing something, and that was, in Rashi's interpretation, the spark that set this off. All right, and then she eventually runs off, and everything that follows afterwards. But let's talk about more of his reaction when he throws her out.
Because she didn't want to leave, he seized her against her will to save himself.
Right, so this Mitzvah David is trying to make sure that we understand that she was not a willing participant in this solution at the doorstep. That when he puts her outside, that she didn't want to go, and that he had to force her out the door. It wasn't, all right, dear, it's dangerous out there, but if you go out there, I'm sure it'll be okay. And she went, okay. And no, he's like, you out. And
he reasoned that when they saw how beautiful she was, they would make peace with her.
Right. So Mitzvah David is trying to get into this guy's head and go, what kind of story could he have been telling himself to justify what he was about to do? That because everybody always believes in their own mind that what they're doing is right. That's the danger, is we're able to rationalize to ourselves so much of what we do as being right, not because it is right, but because we want to do it, or we're afraid to do something differently. And so in this case, he comes up with a quite plausible explanation, which is she's going to go out there and the crowd's going to go, no, guys, what are we doing here? Look at her. No, we can't do that. And they would all just trot on home. We all from the outside can say, what a stupid self-justifying, self-serving, lie. But those are the kind of things that people tell themselves.
Or you could think she's a strong girl, she can take care of
Yeah, she
herself.
can take care of it.
Exactly, and take care of him. Okay, now again, why did he do all the dismembering?
This matter affects all Israel because everyone who goes through Gibeah is in danger. Thus, all Israel is obligated to fix it.
Right? So the idea here is, why would he have sent the pieces to everywhere? Right? Why not just get the group together and go attack, Gibeah on his own? Why lay this at the doorstep of everyone? And he's saying, because this is everyone's responsibility, because it's everyone who's in danger. Because if the Gibeahites are treating everybody who's not from their group in this way, then we've got a problem here. We have a problem here. So again, right idea, wrong tactic, right? The idea that if there's a problem in one town, it's a problem for everyone who's one of the children of Israel. That is a very true, very solid Torah value. But the idea that you would make your point by dismembering a body, that's where you've gone off the rails, right? So one of the beautiful things about the book of Judges, I don't know if beautiful is the right, one of the most fascinating parts of the book of Judges is it shows how well preserved many of the Torah values are, like the theme of hospitality that is doubled down on in this story, and the theme here of our brethren and levirate, and we have to take care of them so they don't die from our midst, and the idea that we are all responsible for one another, and what affects one affects us all. All of those values are still there, but they have been so corrupted during the period of Judges that when they try to implement them, they just absolutely destroy what real morality should be. And that is the great tragedy of this time period.
There was this commentary read from Sforno this past week talking about God is the author of human history, and when God's sword is let loose is when justice is denied or delayed, then we tend to see these episodes
of horrible consequences.
Right.
Exactly.
Because we're not doing what we need to do.
But that notion that thinking you have the right values, and therefore anything you do in the name of those values is justified, it is the great problem of the entire book of Judges. It wasn't that they were valueless. It was that they took their values and applied them in ways that were not guided by the insights of Torah to the details, right? They had the general bullet points, be good to your brothers. And then when that didn't happen, they decided, we'll fix it this way. And that's where things all went bad. So just having the right values isn't enough. That's why we study. We have to understand what to do with those values on a real basis, or else we come up with our own solutions, which are tragedies beyond belief. All right.
Isn't that the case when you justify anything?
Exactly right.
And you don't hold it up to a standard. You hold it up to man's standard.
It will hold it up to usually not even man's standard. You hold it up to your own standard, private standard.
So that makes it okay.
And that is much of what the Torah is.
Stronger person.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly makes it easier if I'm the stronger one in the relationship. Yep.
You know what?